I've been honored for the past few years to be helping ACLU with a drug policy reform project here in Montana. And at the moment, I'm going to turn it over to Skip Schloss, who's another consultant to ACLU who works with me, who's going to introduce our first distinguished speaker. Thanks for coming.
Okay. I'd like to introduce an old friend of mine, Dr. Randall Sechrist. Dr. Sechrist is a certified orthopedic surgeon, board certified. He's currently working as the director of the Spine and Pain Center at St. Patrick's Hospital. He's also serving as the chairman of Montana Pain Initiative. He's also director, owner of Medical Multimedia Group, which is a patient education media company. One quick story about Dr. Sechrist. A number of years ago, I was traveling a good deal on the road, and Dr. Sechrist kindly handed me a box of cassette tapes, and he said, "This will help you in your travels, make things go a little quicker." And I thought, oh great, new music. And I looked, and it was lectures by the great professors on the history of philosophy. So I bopped on down the road with a lecture on Martin Buber and phenomenology going on, or something of that sort. Anyway, without further ado, Dr. Sechrist.
Thank you. Am I on? Is this on? Working now? That was Martin Buber's greatest hits. Was what it was. A couple of things to tell you before I get started. I want you to know I really struggled with trying to come up with something to say to this group for a couple of reasons. One is I've never been a part of the ACLU, so I didn't know exactly what group to expect here today. The other thing is that I'm not really here, I don't think, to be a proponent for anything other than rationality. So I'm not here pushing one thing versus the other. What I would like to see is that we continue to evolve, I guess, as a species, and it still bothers me that we criminalize disease. You know, we've criminalized epilepsy, we've criminalized mental health disorders as far back as the human race can remember. And we're continuing to do it. And the problem with that is that we'll never get to the point to where we actually address the root causes until we quit criminalizing and quit the process of applying judgment to things which have scientific basis and which should be dealt with in a realm. Can you hear me? Were you having trouble hearing me? In a realm where I've lost my train of thought. I don't want to see us continue to criminalize problems and continue to fight the battle that we're not taking care of things adequately and the way they should be taken care of because we're taking care of the wrong problem. So that's the message today. There's a couple of issues that I'm going to discuss, and the first issue has nothing to do with the drug war, has nothing to do with it. I don't necessarily consider myself a soldier in the drug war. I'm hoping I don't become collateral damage because I prescribe a lot of medications and we take care of a lot of pain patients. So I don't want to become collateral damage or a prisoner of war, of the drug war. I think everybody understands that healthcare is in crisis. Anybody that watched the movie Sicko understands that our healthcare system is in an incredible crisis. 47 million people are uninsured. I think in that movie you saw the huge impact of medical cost and the burden of bankruptcy from medical diseases. When I prescribe the treatments, the medications, the tests that I do every day, when patients come back and tell me what it costs them for a month's worth of medications, for example, in this day and age, it's unbelievable to me. We hear over and over how our healthcare system is working because there's a healthcare safety net. And I'm here to tell you that I'm part of that safety net, and it's overwhelmed. It's overwhelmed, it's not functioning the way that people are telling you it's functioning, and it's on the verge of collapse. And it's not going to last much longer. Now, I don't think that you can have a discussion about the drug war unless you understand what it is that for centuries physicians and healthcare providers have sought to do. This is what we tell people we do. And I'm going to go through three different things, three different oaths actually, or declarations or whatever you want to call them, that have guided the practice of medicine for thousands of years. And the first one everybody's familiar with is the Hippocratic Oath. And I've just pulled out some very specific pieces of the Hippocratic Oath. I will keep them from harm and injustice, usually couched in terms of do no harm. That's the first thing that every physician is taught. What I may see or hear in the course of the treatment, or even outside of the treatment in regard to the life of men, which on no account one must spread abroad, I will keep to myself. Patient confidentiality. Whatever houses I may visit, I will come for the benefit of the sick, remaining free of all intentional injustice. Medicine is for the benefit and must be practiced in the interest of the patient. It's not in my interest as a physician. Now, people had some problems because if you read the whole Hippocratic Oath, you'll see lots of things that don't apply anymore. So, back in the 70s, I think, the Oath of Lasagna, which is Dr. Lasagna was a physician and a chairman at Tufts, and he rewrote the Hippocratic Oath. And these are the same elements of that oath that are pulled from the Oath of Lasagna. I swear to fulfill to the best of my ability and judgment this covenant. Remember that word. I will respect the privacy of my patients, for their problems are not disclosed to me that the world may know. I will remember that I remain a member of society with special obligations to all my fellow human beings, those sound of mind and body, as well as the infirm. Again, alluding to the fact that my decisions and my judgments need to be in the interest of the patient. That's the person we serve. It continues, I will remember that I do not treat a fever chart of cancerous growth, but a sick human being whose illness may affect the person's family and economic stability. My responsibility includes these related problems if I am to care adequately for the sick. So you're beginning to see this notion that there is more than simply a transaction going on here. The Declaration of Geneva, which was revised after World War II, very similar. This is more of a worldwide statement of what healthcare is. The health of my patient will be my first consideration. I will respect the secrets that are confided in me even after the patient has died. I will not permit considerations of age, disease, or disability, creed, ethnic origin, gender, nationality, political affiliation, race, sexual orientation, social standing, or any other factor to intervene between my duty and my patient. Again, in the interest of the patient. I will not use my medical knowledge to violate human rights and civil liberties, even under threat. Now, I think you understand with the current position of the American Psychological Association with torture, this is very timely. So, common themes. This is what it's all about. I mean, this is what essentially we should be doing. No harm, patient confidentiality, service in the interest of the patient. These are the things that your healthcare system should be doing for you. I love linguistics. I love linguistics because the words we use to describe things structure our thought. It structures our thought about how we view the world. So, question for you. And I'm going to leave you with a lot of questions today because I don't have a lot of answers, but I have a lot of questions. Is the patient-physician relationship a contract or a covenant? What's the difference? A contract is a legally binding exchange of promises or agreement between parties that the law will enforce. It implies distrust. This is something we use when we're not in a relationship that we can absolutely trust that the other party is working in our best interest, or at least in a common interest. A covenant in its most general sense, is a solemn promise to engage in or refrain from a specified action. More specifically, a covenant, in contrast to a contract, is a one-way agreement whereby the covenanter is the only party bound with a promise. It implies trust. That's what all those oaths are. Those oaths are saying that this is what I'm going to do. It has nothing to do with what the patient is going to do. So, here's the first big question of the day, and that is, what is healthcare? Now, this battle is being fought out today. I mean, as we speak, this battle is being fought out between the market-driven healthcare, the folks who think that healthcare is just like any other business, and the folks who think it's a human right. I mean, most of the European nation, most of the Scandinavians assume that it's a human right. We haven't got there in this country yet. And there's this middle ground called a social benefit. So which is it? I mean, what is healthcare? If we're a service business, are we simply reducing healthcare to an economic transaction? We're clearly adopting the language. It goes back to linguistics. Think about everything you've heard about our healthcare system. Everything about our healthcare system is voiced in the healthcare consumer. It's an economic transaction. It's what it's costing to build a new car. It has been levied across that this is an economic issue. And we're more and more defining and measuring healthcare success and failure economically. If it's a human right, the question is, will we return to the social covenant concept of healthcare? I don't know. I don't know that the Democrats are offering us that. No. I think they're offering us social benefits, what they're offering us. Will we choose to see human condition as something all of us endure equally? I don't know if any of you are fans of the late John Rawls, who crafted this whole, he's a Harvard philosophy professor. His greatest hits are a theory of justice, which basically the whole tenet is that justice as fairness means that you do a thought experiment. You put yourself, you can't decide what family you're born into. You can't decide what your circumstances are. And you sit down at a table with other people and you decide on a system of justice. So what system of justice comes from that? If it's a social benefit, the question becomes this: Does access to health care require some obligation on the part of the patient? I mean, for example, do you have to be a citizen? Do you have to have a job, which is what we have now? Do you have to make enough money to pay for it? Do you have to have a mandate to have insurance? I mean, that to me is a social benefit, right? And I think the other question that this raises for me, and this gets closer into pain management, is what's the role of the physician in this organization or this structure? More and more I find myself, especially as a pain medicine physician, finding myself enforcing social mores rather than taking and saying to the patient, this is what I think is in your best interest. This is where you've come to me, and my only obligation is trying to give you what is in your best interest. You know, I find myself more and more trying to craft a healthcare plan or manage that healthcare plan based on the threat or ever how you want to put it, from people watching over me and saying, you need to enforce this social moray with that relationship that you have with your patient. And specifically in whether it's medications or anything else, their behavior. So here's the questions I would leave you with in Healthcare 2008. What do you expect from your healthcare system? Because I think this is a critical first question. I can't talk about pain management. I can't talk about any of this other stuff until we understand this. What do you expect from your physician? What relationship do you expect? Is it an economic transition? Do you just go into the now care and say, you know, this is what I need? Or do you expect more from that relationship? And what role do you think I should play in this whole system? Am I just a service provider? Or do you trust me to do something for you? It used to be that way. I don't think it is that much anymore. Now, let's move on to chronic pain. I find chronic pain fascinating because it really boils down this is the paradigm for suffering. When the patients that we see with chronic pain, it is a paradigm for every human suffering you could imagine. It's a model. It's one thing to have a terminal illness. It's another thing to have a non-terminal illness that hurts like hell. It becomes an existentialist crisis for a lot of patients. There's plenty of patients I see every day who the question in their mind is it worth it? Is it worth waking up tomorrow? Is it worth going on? There's not a lot of diseases that'll do that, but chronic pain will do that. I think it's also a complex interchange of physiology and behavior. It's not just learn the patterns, apply the remedy. It has nothing to do with that. In the end result, has nothing to do with that. And I would say that chronic pain is not so much treated as it is adapted to by the patient. And my role in a lot of cases is to try to ease that adaptation process and allow those patients to learn to live with that disease, because I'm not going to cure it. I'm not going to make it go away. I can mitigate it sometimes. Now, pain medicine then, if you practice this, it becomes a laboratory for understanding the human condition. The best laboratory I've ever found. It's an incredible opportunity for grappling with self-delusion, both in me and in my patient. It's a two-way street. We both delude ourselves. And probably because chronic pain is essentially a subjective experience. I don't have any objective data to look at. I have to get inside that person's head and understand what they're experiencing as best as I possibly can. It's a multidimensional disease process that involves physiologic. You have to understand some things. You have to understand the physiology. It's not a purely behavioral. It's interesting to move between the behavioral realms and the physiologic realms where people are doing things like putting needles in people, doing surgery, giving them drugs, and then go to the behavioral who the most interesting thing that I ever heard was one of the fathers, the psychology fathers of pain management over at the University of Washington, basically after a lifetime of dealing with patients from a psychological standpoint with chronic pain, came to the conclusion that the cortex of the brain has override capabilities for everything. Now, if you think about those implications, it's a pretty profound implication, because that means that pain is all in your head. If you can somehow harness that force, you can change what you're perceiving. And his take on it was that if you learn it, you can do it. Don't know. I haven't been there. Don't know that. Not certain I'm there yet. But that's a guy who spent his life seeing folks like this. And then there's addiction medicine. Now, I'm going to finish up basically talking about barriers, because I was asked to say, what's it like to be a physician on the ground who deals with this every day? How has the drug war affected me? And like I said, I don't necessarily consider myself an active participant in the drug war. I probably am. The DA showed up at our office one time to do a routine check on one of the physicians, and I'll tell you, my heart was doing about 160, and the staff was looking at me like, "What's wrong with you?" And the DA agent was there, and they quickly understood what was wrong with me. So I guess I am more of a player in this war than I think I am. I would say there's 5 things that I would identify as real barriers to effective pain management. One is unenlightened substance use. Now, I use that term so it's not pejorative, because in most talks you're going to see substance abuse. I think that, again, back to linguistics, that already sets the tone of what we're discussing. And it's a pejorative term that makes us already judge that. What I see is people that are trying to achieve something with substances. It's just not going to work. It's not that it's bad or good or anything else. It's just not going to get them where they want to be. And it's standing in their way of getting where they want to be. Not all substances, but some of them. Insufficient mental health resources. Our mental health system in Missoula is in collapse. It's in crisis. I mean, it's officially in crisis. You can't manage chronic pain without sufficient mental health resources. It's a three-legged stool. It's that physiology, neurobehavioral, and the third is addiction services. There's insufficient substance treatment resources. St. Pat's Hospital closed down their inpatient addiction treatment program. I can't get a patient good quality addiction treatment on an inpatient basis today. I can't do it. I mean, we provide what we can, but I can't get good quality addiction treatment programs. This has all led to a couple other things, deranged priorities of care. I mean, I could go off on this for hours, but I think that the misconception is that chronic pain management has boiled down to a discussion of what surgery do you do, what intervention do you do, what drug do you use. And nobody's really willing to talk about the big picture, which is how are you going to teach these folks to manage their chronic pain condition and help them through that adaptation process. The neurobehavioral aspect is the big piece. And finally is the criminalization of addiction. And again, I'm not necessarily here to talk about the drug war. I'm talking about the criminalization of disease. It's a whole different animal, in my mind. Now, I want to just spend a little bit of time on all of these things. I would say that unenlightened substance use is a very real problem. It is a big problem. It is a big problem for us. These are potentially lethal problems. And I mean, we have a death at the hospital because of some sort of unenlightened substance use fairly routinely. I mean, this is not something that's a bugaboo. It's real. We've got an epidemic of prescription drug use by kids picking them up and that sort of stuff in the home, and that's a real problem. I can't minimize that. It pervades every aspect of healthcare. It's not just pain management. We're treating a lot of problems that come to us as what they're not. They come to us as pain, as mental health, whatever. At the core of that is a problem with substances. And you have to get to that. You have to recognize that that's there and you have to treat it. I think that unenlightened substance use, whatever the substance, distorts reality for the patient. It's a form of self-delusion. They're not getting what they really need. So if I see plenty of people that utilize substances in what I would consider a non-skillful way, that doesn't get them where they want to go. But finally, I think the big issue is I'm convinced our response to the problem has made the situation worse. I'm assuming that most folks here would agree with that criminalizing this behavior has just made it worse. We're not doing what we need to do. Insufficient mental health resources amplifies the difficulty of medical evaluation and treatment. You can't pretend that behavioral aspects of any disease process are not there and expect to manage it appropriately. You're ignoring half the problem. Neuroscience research increasingly suggesting that behavioral attributes are genetically modulated. These are not things that you have as much control over as you think you do. They're incredibly powerful, and the nice thing about them is you can modify them. It's not that they're genetically determined and you're screwed for the rest of your life. You can modify them, as long as you recognize them and do it. And I would say that not having access to mental health resources, adequate mental health resources, just increases the complications because we throw more drugs at people. People use more substances because they're not getting what they really need. Insufficient substance treatment's very similar, only it raises the threshold for willingness to treat pain. It's raised my threshold. I will not take on in our team, and we've got one of the best, the biggest multidisciplinary teams around, we still won't take people on that are at high risk because we can't manage those high risk patients because we don't have those access to those services. And that really limits what we can do because those folks, we will make them worse. It increases complications of pain treatment, corollary to that. Increases suffering and public health costs, sure. I mean, we see a lot of folks who are not getting treatment, period. It doesn't exist. And I ask you, and I'll leave you with this question, it goes back to that whole notion of when are we going to stop criminalizing disease? What's the difference? What's the difference between diabetes and substance abuse? If it's 10% of the population has the genetic markers or is genetically inclined to addiction. What's the difference between, why are we treating diabetes so aggressively and we're not willing to treat this disease process? Why are we putting it in a separate category? It brings us to the last, I think, big point, and that's the criminalization of addiction. Addiction is clearly a genetically driven disease process. I mean, I don't think that's in question anymore. Why do we continue to treat it as if it's a lifestyle choice? A lot of the patients I see, this is not a lifestyle choice. I mean, unfortunately, they are not happy campers. They would do anything to get out of it. Why is the balance in spending so heavily weighted towards punishment and not treatment? I mean, this is really the core issue. We're out of balance. And you have to ask yourself in the end, is it working? I mean, if it ain't working, we need to do something different. I don't think we can lock up everybody. I guess we can. We're down to what, 1 in 99 people? Criminalization of addiction distorts reality. I think that's a form of consensual delusion. If we can attach blame, we feel justified in refusing to address the underlying issues by providing more resources. The criminalization of addiction leads to inadequate resources for managing the disease process. That's an effect. And I really think that what we're seeing is that it truly negatively impacts the attitudes of healthcare providers. They feel justified in not taking care of this disease process or not providing pain treatment because it's now connected to addiction, and all of a sudden pain people are bad people. What's our experience? I'll tell you, this is exactly comes out of all this stuff, or at least I think I connect the dots here. There's an epidemic of providers refusing to provide opiates. There's a new doctor every week that says that I get patients in our office, in our department there at the hospital, that basically says, well, you know, so-and-so said he was no longer going to prescribe opiates. Across the board, period. End of report. Told his patients they got 30 days to find another doctor. There are no other doctors that are going to prescribe opiates in town. Just not there. Patients with chronic pain are unable to find primary care. Not care for their chronic pain. I can't get them primary care because the minute they call up and say, I've got chronic pain, the office says, you know, we're not taking chronic pain. Even if I'm agreeing or our clinic is agreeing to care for their chronic pain. They don't want to have anything to do with them. Addiction medicine resources are limited, as I said, and shrinking. I don't think they're getting any better. I'd love to see them get better, but I don't think they are. Neurobehavioral resources are in crisis, as I said, and I would say that has resulted in more unenlightened substance use, not less. So I'll leave you with 4 questions for the discussion. Going back to the original first part, I mean, what's the healthcare system here for? Should we continue to use a punishment paradigm to attempt to impact a medical problem, which is my position, that's what we're doing. And even more practical, is the current situation sustainable? I don't think it is. And is the current situation rational? I really don't think it is. So, I think that's it for me. Any questions? Yes, sir.
I practiced family practice in Miles City for 37 years, And when we moved to Billings in 1998, my retirement was just like lifting a cloud. Joe Patusk-Folk, you remember the little Abner guy who went around with a cloud over his head? Because I had well over a dozen chronic pain patients for whom I was prescribing significant amount of opiates on a continuing basis. And I just had a black cloud that pretty soon, one of these days, the wonderful DEA agents were going to come in and seize all my records. Mm-hmm. So, going to Billings and retiring from that family practice was a relief.
Mm-hmm. I can imagine.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Can you further describe the systemic oversight by the DEA of doctors and sort of the experiences your other colleagues have had and how that has operated to basically silence doctors when it comes to prescribing opiates?
You don't have to do a lot to put fear, to change people's behavior. And it goes back to the first half of the talk, which is if you don't consider yourself to have any sort of obligation to the people that present themselves to you, and you're strictly doing an economic transaction or a business transaction, any business in the world looks at a risk-benefit analysis and says, too risky, not going to do this. So part of the problem, I think, is that shift, and it's not going to change. I mean, I'd love to say that we're going to go back to this wonderful world of Marcus Welby, but it's not going to change. I mean, we're going to continue to become, I think, more and more of a business, the social, the service line, so to speak, mentality of medicine. And I think that's the problem. People here, very rarely do we get called or anybody show up at our office. I would probably challenge you to find one physician in the Missoula area that's not prescribing opiates by choice that had any direct contact with the DEA. And when they come, they're nice folks. I mean, this is the sort of thing, I deal with the police force downtown on a relatively regular basis. These guys have their own view of the world. They have their own problems. And when they come in and talk to us, the things they're seeing, the atrocities they're seeing on their end, you can see how they would sort of adopt this policy. We have great discussions with them. It's more the threat. It's more this notion that there's this big brother out there. And people just say, like Dr. Stickney said, clouds lifted, I'm no longer prescribing opiates. Who wouldn't go for that? So there's no stormtroopers storming through my office saying, give me your records.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Randy, why don't you let me speak to that?
Go for it.
First of all, DEA agents do show up in your office in jackboots, armed with revolvers. They do confiscate records and DEA certificates. I don't know if Dr. Stickney was in Billings when Dr. Nelson still practiced, Richard Nelson, the neurologist.
Yeah.
But Richard was, in fact, assaulted by DEA agents in his office who did confiscate his records and take his meds and take his DEA certificate. And what will become of his case, which was in Time magazine, is very difficult to say because he subsequently suffered an auto accident and he's never going to return to medical practice, so they have no interest in pursuing him. DEA agents basically presume that they have a right on behalf of the public that they serve to enforce their interpretation of a law that says if you prescribe opioids without medical need, without medical justification, then you've broken the law. That law is a federal offense. It's subject to indictment under federal law, and I can speak to it personally. So I think your statements about how they induce fear are real, but they don't do it simply by caricature. They do it by targeting mostly solo physicians. They rarely target doctors that are in groups, partly because group practice modifies physician behavior, always. Individual physicians are much more likely to respond to the needs of their patients based on their individual conscience than anybody who practices in a group who by nature compromises so that the goals of the group can be achieved. So individuals are the targets of the DEA, and they're also easier to pick off. They oftentimes are seen on the fringes of the local medical community, so there's very often, it's easy to assume that they're not going to get much support from their colleagues, and they don't. And they can bankrupt them in a relatively short period of time.
Yep.
The DEA does not have to prosecute a physician in order to get them, or does not have to win a conviction against a physician to get them basically out of practice, because they can bleed them to death. And unless you can qualify for federal public defender status, you're going to lose every time, because they can drag it out until you basically don't have a cent left.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. I'm not trying to belittle that, because obviously my experience will change once some guy comes in and says, "I'm here to see you." But you know, that in some ways that's no different than the same. I watched a friend of mine have the similar experience. I guess it was with the GAO, who came in for Medicare fraud, had nothing to do with drugs, and it was exactly the same sort of scenario, and it went on forever. And essentially, as it goes on, like you say, the problem is that you've already lost. The minute they show up at your office, you've already lost, because within that community, pretty much you're done. I mean, you know, as you said, the rest of the providers sort of move away from you there on the Group W bench, and they really know that they ostracize a few, and that's what people whisper about in all these groups. That's why all of us are sitting around thinking, well, we heard these stories. But what I'm saying is that I don't think that if you talk to most people in Missoula, their behavior is about the stories they've heard similar to yours and not direct experience. And I'm not belittling direct experience. I'm just saying that's why everybody is going and saying, gosh, you know, I don't want to be in that position, and gosh, you know, I know this guy hurts, but I'm not putting myself at risk to help that guy's pain, period.
I think you can extend that, you know, recognize you're talking about GAO. What everybody in this room needs to recognize is that the federal government is able to hold up, you know, criminal response to physician behavior, because basically every time you make a billing mistake, it's defined as fraud. When physicians make mistakes in practice that don't involve patients but involve financial charges, they're subject to criminal prosecution, because our mistakes are defined by the federal government as fraud.
Right. Yes, sir.
Yeah, my question is kind of, in terms of the opiates in the DEA, what about in terms of like doctors who give recommendation letters for medical marijuana? Is the DEA posing a big threat here or not? And I mean, I know they've gone out there sort of in California and other places, but is that a big scenario here yet, or is it going to be?
I don't know that. I don't know the answer to that, because I have no experience with that whatsoever.
I can speak to that.
The first half, the second half of this workshop.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
Say, what if you give George Bush or Cheney opiates? Would they bother you?
Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Yeah, I was reading an article recently talking about, the headline was something to the effect that addiction has been cured, and they were talking about
What was that?
that addiction has been cured, or there's a potential cure for addiction, and it has to do with removing the effects of being high from different types of drugs, and there's a medication that you can take that shuts down those centers of the brain. What kind of effects would that have on the effectiveness of opiates to medicate this pain? Do they need the endorphin release or the endorphin release and the high feeling that comes from the opiates to mitigate the pain, or is it something that would happen even if they didn't have this high?
I don't know exactly what drug you're talking about. I mean, the one that's used right now is Suboxone, which is a combination of an opiate and an antagonist that essentially controls how much the opiate works. But I'm not certain what you're talking about. Yes, sir.
You said your group
can't treat high-risk patients?
I mean, it's all on a continuum.
Yeah. Are those people for whom you can't get the kind of services to support their high-risk behavior? Is that what
Yeah.
you mean when you say that?
Yeah. I mean, the question is can you manage whatever you want to call addictive behavior? Can you manage aberrant behavior? Can you protect them from themselves in some ways? And what are you willing to do to protect them from themselves? I mean, I've seen when we had the addiction treatment program there, people used to go and pick up their drugs every morning so that there was no temptation to sort of take more. So, I mean, there's lots of things you can do to manage and help people manage their behavior. Yes, sir.
Do you think that it's still helpful to treat addictions as a disease, or can we evolve into some sort of existential decision-making?
Well, Timothy Leary did. I mean, the guy that basically did all the research with LSD, I mean, his argument was always that, what's the big deal? So, yeah, I guess you can. I guess I go back to the notion of what are you really trying to do with that substance? What do you want that substance to do for you? And, is it, again, we get into this whole notion of if somebody says, my life's miserable, would you euthanize me? I mean, yeah. I mean, that's a choice as well. I mean, we haven't grappled with that one yet. I mean, ask any physician. You'll get a lot of different answers. You won't get across the board, no, that's wrong. You'll get a lot of different answers. If my mother asks me, I'll look around, make sure there's no wires, tabs. I'll say, yep, you tell me when, and I'll take care of you. If you come and ask me and I don't know you, I'll probably say, no, I don't do that.
I'm going to have to cut this off, at least just temporarily, so that we have time for our next segment and more questions that could include more questions for Dr. Sechrist as well. And just for the moment, thank Dr. Sechrist for his time. I think, I assume you've gotten a taste for just how huge a subject we've tapped into today, and we've hardly obviously scratched the surface of the physician side of the issue as regards pain treatment using pharmaceuticals that are available at the pharmacy. There's no question that the DEA doesn't have to target too many physicians to have a chilling effect throughout the medical profession on what physicians are willing to do, and I think Dr. Sechrist gave a good introduction, and Dr. Christensen's comments, Dr. Stickney's as well, enhanced the impressions of that. We're going to shift gears completely now, although the subject is still under the umbrella of the drug war. And still relates to chronic pain. Medical marijuana has been legal in Montana for 4 years now. There are about 625 patients in 34 counties based on recommendations from, I believe, 148 different physicians right now. But even though it's legal, some patients unfortunately still do encounter serious and even terrifying legal problems. The patients you're going to hear from today all suffer from conditions that include but are not limited to severe chronic pain. And we've asked them to come share with you some insight as to how medical marijuana addresses their chronic pain problems, the difference it makes in their lives, and perhaps a little bit about how the legality of the issue still affects them, because even though it's legal in Montana, there are a lot of law enforcement agents in the state who don't quite understand our law, and of course it still does remain technically illegal on the federal level. The federal government has never actually prosecuted a patient, but it still gets in the way and causes a lot of fear for those patients that are out there. We've asked each of them to try to not talk more than 5 minutes so that we can squeeze in a range of perspectives and leave a little more time for questions. The first patient we're going to hear from is actually president of Patients and Families United, or chairman of the board. Patients and Families United is a support group for the state's medical marijuana patients, regardless of their medical condition, and for pain patients, whether they use medical marijuana or not. And our chairman of the board is Bob Maharg from Ravalli County.
Good afternoon. This I will explain momentarily. My name is Bob Maharg. I'm originally from Florida. I am a medically retired RN who's worked and run major recovery rooms. I've worked in the OR, I've worked in the ER, I've worked, all in these little alphabet units of a hospital. To Dr. Our first speaker here, and Dr. McKinley, I believe, on the other side of the opiate issue, in that I've been the one that managed the pain in temporary basis in the recovery room and probably pushed a whole lot of opiates through plumbing, more so than the physician. It is only supposed to be a short-term remedy, not to be extended out into a lifetime. I have diabetes. I've had it for 34 years. It cut short a military career, which irritated me to no end. It is along the way, once you're diagnosed, you basically get on the slide. It is not a vertical inclination. It is a declination. It's just a matter of which increments you manage to slide downhill. Currently, my neurologist here in town says I have something that he actually got into a conference call with his med school buddies afterwards. He says, "You're not going to believe what I had in my clinic today." Apparently what I have is kind of rare. They call it a polyradicular diabetic neuropathy. It's a wonderful little disorder. It causes you, it's sort of like spasticity and pain, and being pregnant in the morning. You never know what you're going to wake up to have at this point. He considers me his favorite science project, since I'm never the same 2 visits in a row. We sort of have my pain managed on an unconventional method, but there's no opiates involved, and it's potentiated or complemented by the use of medicinal pot. I'm not unfamiliar with it. Like, summer of love '67 was my first year of exploration, I guess. Reader's Digest had a cover copy, something about marijuana, and I couldn't believe what they were telling me, so I went ahead and tried it. I'm still here. The pain that goes on with the diabetes is most unique in that you start getting pieces of you whittled away. And if I start at the top, I can go all the way to my toes with little things that diabetes has done that are annoying again. I've had my neck bolted together. 4, 5, and 6 were done. I've had quadruple bypass, which I had wonderful blood work, but apparently diabetes took the vessels and shrank them for me and caused some issues known as an MI. I've had a nerve move to help try and fix contracture that is really unique to play the guitar with. It doesn't always cooperate. I've had a bypass done in my right leg. Part of my right foot's missing, and the toes and pieces of my left foot are missing. In other words, I sort of hurt all over. The bad days are a migraine, the rest of the days are just your average headache. And it's like a headache every day. You can expect it. It's going to be there. Some days it's in a greater influence, and some mornings it's a migraine, or some afternoons it's a migraine briefly. And you never know It's like throwing a dart at the calendar to pick up a date. You're not going to have a whole lot of success doing it that way. With that, if I can, I'd like to pass it on to...
Just say a few words about the difference in your life with and without.
well, okay. There are multiple varieties. We were discussing this earlier. It's like going into one of the jelly bean stores and picking one out automatically, blindfolded, that's going to work for you. We don't have a WebMD that allows us to go and look on the internet and say, oh, this variety would be good for MS. Federal government's, a great help for us in being able to tabulate all this different varieties and information to share with people who hurt, which is the bottom line, again, to the original topics. It works, it potentiates the meds that I'm taking. There's never a day that it works completely, but it does make things better than they were. There's no way of telling, even with a variety, a particular brand, if you will, like ibuprofen or OxyContin or anything. You don't know every day that it's going to be consistent because you have changed. And so until we can get it all down on a syllabus that we can go through and learn, this works for this works for that, but not always. One other topic was my little legal issue. Ravalli County, after a 24-hour by the warrant investigation, showed up at my house and had more information than they could have acquired in 24 hours, but they still showed up, knowing that I was a medical patient, that I had a very small grow operation in my basement. Because I used my car to bring home plastic buckets, they seized my vehicle. I had just had my heel bone removed. I was in a splint cast, and I was hitchhiking from Stevensville to Missoula. This time of year, since they showed up on the 12th of January, or the 11th, excuse me, you remember these dates, to my lawyer and my doctor's appointments because there was no transportation. They had seized it because they had used it to bring home plastic buckets for a criminal operation. Strong rationale there. They took all the plants, ripped them out. They were going to be expiring anyway because they'd been harvested and were just sticks in the dirt, as the case may be. What else did we take? Records, all kinds of things. And when we finally got it through the Montana State Supreme Court as a review, and they kicked it back within 2 weeks of it coming back saying, you weren't exactly the most adept at this prosecution, put it politely. Case is dismissed while we were sitting there trying to strike jurors for a trial. The prosecutor stood up and dismissed it and said he gets all his property back.
As Tom introduced me, my name's Eric Billings. I've lived in Montana since 1996. I moved up here from San Diego. I was diagnosed with HIV/AIDS when I was 29 years old. I'll be 46 next week. During that time, I was thinking when Bob was talking, what life was like before I had the medical marijuana and after. In 1995, I had a similar operation to Meals on Wheels, delivering food to my home in San Diego because I was too weak to cook for myself. I now work 2 jobs. During that time, I took 36 pills a day. Pills, AZT every 4 hours, 4 of them. I couldn't sleep at all. Sleep deprivation was terrific. My neuropathy out of control. chronic pain issues I couldn't even begin to, from severe headaches to nausea, you name it, I had it. I weighed 88 pounds at the time. I was a conservative, but please don't stone me, Republican businessman in San Diego. Very tight, conservative Republican community. My doctor at the time had to convince me to even start smoking marijuana. He was afraid I was going to die. And it's just the opposite approach we have to take now, unfortunately. Patients in this day and age have to go to their providers to talk their provider into giving them a recommendation, which is a sad thing. Marijuana's been around forever. It's safer than aspirin. If there's anything I can get across to any healthcare physician, please look at medical marijuana first. 36 pills a day back then, 5 pills a day now. Hydrocortisones, Vicodins, Motrins, you name it, I was on it. No longer. Antidepressants, Prozac, Klonopin, on all of those things. Not anymore. The only medications I'm required to take are my AIDS medications and one medication, oxandrolone, which is an anabolic steroid to help me maintain muscle mass. I now work 2 jobs. I no longer work for myself. I don't have that kind of energy. But quality of life has changed so much, substantially so much. I can't even describe it. Back then, I was a very successful business person. I lost all my businesses. I lost my home. Now I own a home, totally paid for, no mortgage, and I'm overjoyed. Medical marijuana makes a difference in people's lives every single day. Right now, a lot of our issues are legal issues. I'll make this really quick. Patients in this state need more protections. We need to expand access to other people who could use this medication and not have to get stuck in the pharmaceuticals. So if that's one thing I'd ask, Tom's getting up now, please do no harm first and help your patients out second. Thank you.
Thanks, Eric. I think to quantify the change in Eric's life, I think it's about $30,000 per year in medications that he doesn't have to spend when he can have medical marijuana to address his nausea, his wasting, appetite problems, and pain. Our next 2 speakers, I'm going to introduce them both as a combination, and they may go back and forth between themselves for a few minutes. Christina and Wetch on the left, and her daughter Katie on the right, from Yellowstone County. Both suffer from a condition called Chiari brain malformation. They'll try to describe it very briefly and then talk about the difference medical marijuana has made for them.
Hello. You're probably confused, left, right. She is the younger one. Some of you may be aware of the Extreme Home Makeover edition that took place in Billings, Montana this past year. That is the disease that we have, and the Carters are friends of ours, and unfortunately it's a highly genetic disease that's passed on. It's dominant in females. Men do get it, but mainly women. Katie basically, well, what it is, to explain briefly, is Chiari malformation type 1 is where the back of your head, the posterior fossa, it's a skull-based problem, is volumetrically, in a lot of cases, too small. So it causes a crowding of the cerebellum, the bottom of the brain. It literally is like corking a wine bottle. It kind of forces that cerebellum down into the C-spine. And from there you can have just that, or you can have syringomyelia, which is where your CSF fluid that's produced in your brain that is basically the cushion for your spinal cord. That can have blockages, the flow blockages, and then you can develop all kinds of other branched problems from that. When Katie was 14 years old, I'd sent her out to the Bay Area, out of San Francisco, to stay with a friend in Vallejo, and they hit all the amusement park rides. She came home that summer with a hellacious headache, lightning bolt brain cramp headache in the back of her head that she had never described before. And that's kind of basically how this nightmarish journey began. Katie has had 5 brain and spinal surgeries. She had an original decompression done in Billings in March of '04. About a year and 4 months later, throughout that course of the year, she developed supraventricular tachycardia issues. Her joints started to, her elbows and her knees and her hips would literally dislocate on her when she was walking. She was an athlete. She went from sport to sport to sport, all through through grade school and junior high, to basically nothing. We had to pull her out of everything. So from that, her muscle tone kind of went down as it would with anybody, and then she started to just pop out, literally. And then later on, after her decompression in Billings, her heart started to flip out. Literally, it would take off at such high rates that she had orthostatic problems, POTS syndrome. She would just drop attacks. And so basically, we ended up at the Chiari Institute in New York on Long Island, where they specialize in these conditions, and found out that our ability to be so flexible is called Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. It's a joint hypermobility problem. It's an issue with the collagen, and we were born with this. In high school and grade school, it was like I was the girl that could do all the super weird tricks. You know, I didn't dislocate like she did, but I could sure bend into some strange positions. And so from there, she had a revision done in May of '05. The following March, we found out because of the Ehlers-Danlos syndrome that oftentimes you can end up with cervical instability because they do laminectomies to get to work on the Chiari issue, and they stretch things and move things, and then they shave down your vertebrae literally to work. So they had warned us that there could be a possibility that Katie would have some issues with the hypermobility in the neck. We found out that that's what was causing the heart issue. We also have retroflexed odontoid bones, which only the physicians and nurses would probably know what that is. And that's when her neck had dropped and the skull had dropped down just enough with the laxicity of the neck and the skull that the odontoid bone was making just enough of a connection with the brainstem to where that was causing the heart rates to just go off the charts. So she was basically, they proceeded with a cranial-cervical rodding infusion, which she has rods literally hooked into her skull, and it goes down to the C4, and then from 4 to 6 she has an anterior fusion. And that's what stabilizes her neck, and it did stop the heart issues. Nobody back home in Billings could understand why her heart was just going nuts. And the whole problem with this disease is it's a structural problem, which from there causes, I would say probably two dozen types of symptoms that you can have. Pain issues, nausea issues, insomnia, tingling and numbness, all kinds of neural problems. So from here, I'm going to let Katie take over and share with you how the benefit of medicating with medicinal marijuana has made a difference in her life.
Hi, I became a registered patient last year when I was 17, and my life has changed dramatically. Half the time I spend half the day kissing the porcelain, and then the other half the day I'm usually knocked out by a Demerol shot. But since I've started smoking, it keeps me out of the emergency room. I have extreme muscle spasms from being cut open so many times, and I did a round of Botox and that worked, and then my muscles stopped responding to it. And when I smoke, just my muscles are completely relaxed. My shoulders used to just be up and just stuck there, and I don't know, it helps with the pain, the nausea. It helps everything. It's really hard to explain. It helps lower the pressure in my brain, so my migraines are a lot easier, and you can just feel it work, and it's not addicting. I'm on high amounts of narcotics, and it's just caused more problems. You just end up on more medicines, and they take over your life. And they're now detoxing me because I'm experiencing rebound pain, and I think I'm just going to be able to do the marijuana without any of the narcotics.
off with Bob Baharg, who alluded to legal problems he had in Ravalli County that cost him an arm and a leg, but that ultimately the day before his trial was to begin, they dropped the charges. Our last speaker is in a similar predicament at the moment. You may have read just a couple weeks ago in the Dillon Tribune, in fact, there were 2 articles on the same page of the paper. The top article was all about how the local drug task force had just done the biggest marijuana bust ever with this giant, extremely sophisticated grow operation, and they were basically beating themselves on the chest. And the bigger article right below it was about how the current federal budget would cut funding for the drug task force. And it had the county sheriff talking about how we wouldn't have been able to do this great big grow bust if not for the drug task force, and this funding is so important. Turns out that was a medical marijuana patient involved in that case. We keep hearing that they intend to bring charges and possibly arrest and prosecute him. We're hoping they won't, but our last speaker is the person involved in that case. His name is Scott Day from north of Dillon.
Well, I hope that they don't press charges because the fact is the law protects me. I fall under a clause that is in the law that covers a medicinal cannabis user for what they need. And anyway, I'm here today because I'm appalled at the lack of knowledge people have for the plant cannabis. I really think that so many patients are not getting the treatment they should be because doctors are afraid to give a signature or recommend or or do anything to risk their own neck. The fact is the drug task force did need to boost their ego apparently because I clearly, like so many people, am in need. I was born with a genetic deficiency called mucopolysaccharidosis, Hurler-Shea, and it's a degenerative disease that slows down my body and eventually causes system failure. And I'm 34 years of age, and I've used cannabis for about 12 years medicinally. And I'm so upset that they didn't even attempt to think that I was protected under the law. They just put me straight into that criminal position, and they didn't have any listening to what I had to say about what I needed it for. My body is constantly being attacked. I have muscle spasms, crushed discs, glaucoma, severe arthritis. The list goes on and on and on. And the lack of the knowledge that the drug task force showed toward the law, it's saddening to me. And I know it's all because of the big picture of the historical baggage that marijuana or cannabis has grown, pardon the pun, grown together over centuries. Anyway, the therapeutics that cannabis did for me and is capable of is totally astronomical. And the fact that we have a 6-plant policy is crazy, because a person like me, I have multiple symptoms. I have multiple problems, and cannabis is capable and has been treating those problems for almost a dozen years. The people, the public, has little to no knowledge of the potential that there is from the cannabis plant that possesses almost 70 cannabinoids. Different plants from different regions have different contents, and they can be bred together to have different contents and helping different ailments. And this is where I ran into a problem, and that is I needed to treat multiple ailments. And you have to be able to have a replica of that cannabis plant. And therefore your number of plants, just if you have, as you've heard from all these patients, they've got numerous different symptoms. And to treat those symptoms of muscle spasms, whichever it is, there are numerous. I have numerous. Whatever it is, there's a combination out there that you have to go and find, as Bob was speaking of. And for me, I lost years of research on medicine that worked for me. It's heart-wrenching, because my medicine, what worked for me and what has helped me over years, is gone. And for life to be productive and happy and enjoyable, and they just took it away and killed it. And it's hard for me to think that people can't see that side of cannabis, that capability, that amazing potential of treating so many different things with different combinations of those cannabinoids, and the fact that it's so much cheaper than getting involved in the pharmaceutical numbers. It's so much cheaper. But I wish, I don't feel ill faith to the police department. I'm frustrated for their lack of knowledge and their lack of respect for what I needed and I had, and they took it and drug it in the dirt and made it horrible. And just the whole lack of knowledge that the public has, task force has. I hope in time, we all can look at things a little better and try to understand it a little better, and we'll find that there's an amazing potential for the plant, not the plant, but the plants, the different species or different combinations and so on. I think that it's hard and frustrating for me to see the drug war is being called a war, because it's not. A war is meant to be ended, and the drug war is never going to end. It will just continue, and cannabis shouldn't be even considered a part of this war.
Thanks, Scott. Cut you off. Thanks, Scott. I'm not sure if we have time for questions or not. Just wanted to thank Scott Day for taking the time to be here. There was a question earlier about doctor vulnerability with the DEA, and in fact, one of the ironies is doctors are much better protected than patients, even in a state like Montana with the legal law we've got. Our law specifically says that doctors cannot suffer any kind of recrimination or penalty for signing a recommendation. And in addition, there are federal court cases that literally enjoin the federal government from taking any action against a physician for discussing or recommending marijuana to a patient. And under our law, if a police agent or anyone were to ask the state health department the identity of any physician who has recommended, the answer would be, sorry, we can't tell you that, it's against the law, and I'll go to jail if I tell you. However, if a cop does ask whether a particular person is registered to be a patient, the state will answer that question. So the physicians who have recommended in Montana have a lot more privacy protection and protection generally than patients do, even under the law. Any questions we could address quickly? Yeah, Mike?
At one time, I think there are several allies in the drug war against this kind of stuff, but I think the biggest ally we have is actually the jury box, because juries historically can judge the law both their conscience. We all probably heard of the case of the colony of New York where Peter Zinger told a lie about the governor even though it was true, and the jury says, well, we're going to find the guy not guilty, and I think that's gone on through time, and even though the judge may use the instructions, you don't have to follow them because you can't be convicted. And I'm reminded of a story of Steve Dillon, who was the head of NORML, and one of his clients was convicted on a medical marijuana charge. Well, he simply just brought his patient in on a gurney on the court date, and the judge and the prosecution knew that the jury was not going to convict, and so they dropped all charges. And so I think if we recognize these facts as jurors, and we follow our hearts, that on cases like these, we can simply refuse to convict, and they can't do anything about it. And that's one of the most important things we have in this country, to protect ourselves.
Thank you for the comment. Mike's talking about jury nullification and the right and the power of a jury to decide whatever it wants, regardless of what the law is. But actually, for other reasons, even having nothing to do with that, we always recommend our group, Patients and Families United, to any patient or caregiver who runs into trouble to insist on the right to a jury trial, because there's just no question your probable outcome is a bit better. And also remember, Montana adopted the medical marijuana law by a broader margin of victory in the vote than any other state. And there's hardly a county in the state that didn't favor making medical marijuana illegal for people like you've heard today.
Yeah, I don't know. We're in the ACLU here, but they were doing I don't know what happened to the case, but there was a case in California that they tried somebody for medical marijuana sales or growth, and they ruled that they could not bring any evidence that that was medical marijuana into the federal court. I'm trying to remember what the case was.
Well, there have been a number of cases. You might be alluding to one that was brought actually by a friend of ours, Angel Raish. She had brought a case that won at every level until it got to the Supreme Court. That case, she was arguing that the federal government did not have a right to enforce its law in a state with a compassionate law like ours. At the Supreme Court level, she lost that. That case did not strike down the validity of state laws like ours, but it just upheld the federal right to do its own thing. She then brought a different case, again proactive, where her argument was that she has the right to argue that that marijuana is a medical necessity for her, and to therefore obtain from that argument an order from the court that she not be messed with by even the federal government. And in that case, it didn't go all the way to the Supreme Court, but I think it was at the Ninth Circuit level. The finding was, no, you can bring a medical necessity defense if you're ever prosecuted by the federal government, but you can't use that proactively to make yourself immune ahead of the fact. And I think that's probably the case you were alluding to. And now I'm being told I need to stop.
Yeah, this is the banquet room for this evening. The folks that are setting up the room need to get into, so I'm sorry we have to cut off the questions.
Okay. Thanks to the panel. We will all be here for the banquet tonight, so those of you who are staying will be glad to talk with you over water or beer or better. Thanks for coming.